Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. You work hard throughout your entire working career, paying into Social Security, paying into a trust. And that idea, paying into a trust, conjures up this image that that money is going to be sitting there waiting for you. But then we find that this money is being used. It's being loaned out to fund other government programs. That's shocking, right? Well, let's dig into the truth, because this requires a little bit unpacking. There's more to this than meets the eye. First and foremost, let's take a step back and look at the basics of how Social Security is funded. The primary funding source for Social Security comes from payroll taxes. Employees and employers each contribute 6.2% on wages up to an income of $176,100 a year. That's the limit for 2025, and that number is indexed for inflation and does change on an annual basis. If you're self-employed, you contribute 12.4% because you contribute both the employee and the employer side. These taxes are collected under the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, or FICA, and this covers both Social Security and Medicare. But for this video, we're only focusing on Social Security. Now, there are actually two separate funds to reference when we talk about Social Security. We have the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, which is used for benefits for retirees and their families and survivors of deceased workers. And then the Disability Insurance Trust Fund, which provides benefits for disabled workers and their families. All payroll taxes flow into these funds. Another source of funding for Social Security comes from the federal taxes levied on Social Security benefits themselves, and this topic has been the subject of recent political debate. A portion of your Social Security benefits can be subject to federal taxes depending on your income and filing status. For higher income earners, up to 85% of their benefits could be subject to tax. How much of your Social Security is subject to tax is based on your provisional income, and that is something I go over in more detail in this video, and I will link it here and down below if that's something you're interested in exploring. Let's talk about these tax thresholds for a moment, because there's a category where up to 50% of your benefits could be subject to federal taxes, or for higher income earners, up to 85% of their benefits from Social Security could be subject to federal tax. But what happens to this tax revenue gets a little bit more complicated. So any taxes generated from this 50% threshold, the taxes collected on this portion are directed to the Social Security trust funds. Thus, this is another direct funding source for Social Security. However, the taxes collected on the additional 35%, i.e. the portion between 50% and 85%, are allocated to the Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund, so not directly Social Security itself. The final source of funding comes through investments and interest income. Before we talk about interest and investment revenue sources of the program, let's talk about Social Security. Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system where it's the deductions from today's workers that are going to fund today's beneficiaries. It's not as if the deductions are being taken from your paycheck and being put into a trust that will one day be there when you retire. And this is one of the main criticisms of the program. So with this concept in mind, that the money that is going into the fund today is also being used to pay today's retirees, let's discuss interest as a revenue source for the fund. When the fund takes in more than it pays out, the surplus is invested in special U.S. Treasury securities that earn interest. These securities are a way for the government to borrow from these trust funds through what are considered safe investment vehicles, and the interest revenue generated from these investments does contribute billions of dollars on an annual basis to the Social Security trust funds. Social Security invests surplus funds in U.S. Treasury securities, which contribute to the general pool of federal funding. The government can then use this funding for a variety of expenditures, such as defense, education, or infrastructure. Think of it like investing in a T-bill. When you buy a T-bill, that money you give the government goes into the general fund and the government uses it for various government expenses. Once that T-bill matures, you get back your principal plus interest. CDs with a bank work in a similar fashion. You deposit your money, the bank then uses this money to finance mortgages or auto loans, and then once that CD matures, you get your principal back plus interest. The government invests these surplus funds into Treasury securities as a way to prevent this money from sitting idle. This money earns interest, and this interest flows back into the Social Security Trust Fund, and it does serve as an additional revenue source. Now, the idea is that Treasury securities are inherently risk-free, or essentially as safe as you can get because they're backed by the full faith of the US government. But that being said, this activity generates a lot of controversy and a lot of criticism. Critics argue that this system allows the government to use these trust funds to cover deficits, potentially threatening Social Security's long-term solvency. But the biggest challenge with Social Security is a shift in demographics. We have a fewer number of workers supporting a growing number of retirees, not the borrowing of funds themselves. So, does the government borrow from Social Security to fund other government programs? Yes, but not in a direct way. Money is loaned to other programs through Treasury securities, and these Treasury securities generate interest income that is then funneled back into the Social Security Trust itself. Social Security itself does have a seasonality to it, so to speak. You can see that incomes to the fund ebb and flow throughout the year in a predictable fashion. And there are two primary reasons for this. Tax income generally reaches a peak in the second calendar quarter when many self-employed people pay their taxes with their income tax returns. After the second quarter, tax income falls as earnings of more and more people reach the taxable maximum for Social Security. And two, interest on special issue securities is paid on June 30th and December 31st, while relatively small amounts of interest are paid in every month when securities are redeemed. Interest income is always largest in the second and fourth quarters. We've considered how Social Security is funded. It's equally important to look at the expenses faced by the program. Social Security itself is highly efficient, with administrative expenses accounting for less than 1% of the program's total expenses, generally hovering around 0.7%. But let's look at the system's payouts. For the most recent full fiscal year on file, 2023, Social Security paid out roughly $1.35 trillion in benefits, which accounted for 22% of our entire federal budget. However, in that year, the Social Security Fund ran a deficit, reducing overall fund reserves by around $41 billion. Let's look at how these funds were paid out by the various trusts. When it comes to the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust, what we traditionally think of as Social Security, roughly 68% of the benefits were paid out directly to retired workers. The remainder gets paid out to spouses of retired workers, widows and widowers of deceased workers, or in certain circumstances, other family members. For the Social Security Disability Trust, 94% of benefits go directly to disabled workers, and the remainder going to children or spouses of the disabled workers. In recent years, as was the case with our 2023 example, expenditures have exceeded revenues, excluding interest, and this gap has been filled by drawing down on trust reserves. Again, we have a demographic shift with an aging population where fewer workers are supporting a growing number of retirees. Without changes to funding or benefits, the trusts are expected to be depleted by mid-2030s. After that, incoming payroll taxes would only be enough to support 75 to 80% of current payouts. That is the kind of thing that triggers these scary headlines saying Social Security is going to run out of money. It's likely that Congress will take action to safeguard Social Security's solvency, as it has in the past, though the exact timing and the measures remain uncertain. This may look like increasing the payroll tax rate or increasing the pay cap threshold or adjusting eligibility requirements or exploring alternative revenue sources. There are a number of levers they can pull on. I just don't like to give too much credibility to the headline that Social Security is running out of money. Social Security is vital for millions of people, but still the program is misunderstood and often surrounded by a lot of misconceptions. The idea that funds are borrowed from Social Security itself sparks outrage, but it's worth taking a deeper dive and understanding the risks that are involved, the safeguards that are put in place, and what this truly means for the program's future. What are your thoughts on this? Leave them in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. $176,100. The new limit, have to remember it. Okay, remember it, new limit for 2025. Are going to fund to today's beneficiaries. To today's, I don't think I should say that. To today. sounds like a stutter. Oh, jeez. I'm like looking at a 5% battery and freaking out. I need to slow down. And without, oh my God, 1% battery. I have to say 2 sentences. Do you think I can get it done? Oh, we're redlined. There's not even a percentage left. Social sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. I made it.